All right, I'm going to kick us off here. Thank you all so much for being with us today for this webinar between the National League of Cities and Pallet Shelter on understanding the landscape of reentry for individuals exiting homeless or the criminal legal system. My name is Annie Osborne, and I'm the Interim Director of Strategic Partnerships for the National League of Cities. We've partnered with Pallet for the last few years and are really excited to partner with them on this event. They have just been a phenomenal support to local governments with some of the most thorny and intractable issues that local leaders face, such as homelessness, housing supply, workforce, and reentry. So we really want to thank Pallet for their partnership, their dedication and support for local governments, and their leadership on these issues. Today we'll be hearing from several different organizations and people with lived experience who are committed to developing and implementing strategies that support those transitioning from incarceration or homelessness back to their communities. Our hope is that by the end of the webinar, you will have learned what other cities and organizations are doing to achieve impact on reentry and how to implement these strategies in your community. You'll hear more about NLC's work on this issue from my colleague, Tony McWright, who is the Program Manager for Justice Initiatives at the National League of Cities and is speaking on the panel. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Amy King, the CEO, founder, and driving force behind Pallet. She is leading the webinar, and we've just really enjoyed working with her and her team over the last couple of years. So thank you, Amy. She will introduce the rest of the phenomenal panel, and we appreciate you all being here again today.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. It's great to be with you all today. As Annie mentioned, my name is Amy King, and I am the founder and CEO of Pallet. I'm really excited to be joined by our panel members today and to be welcoming all of you into this webinar. This particular issue that we're talking about today, Pallet's led a couple webinars on a variety of issues, but this particular issue is one that's really near and dear to my heart. More than the vast majority of Pallet's staff are folks that have exited the justice system here in Washington State, where we are based. And Pallet also has a sister nonprofit that we started at the same time called Weld Seattle that provides wraparound services and support and housing access to people in Washington State that are exiting the justice system. And as a result of that work, I have had the privilege of walking alongside a great number of people in my home community that are returning to society from their incarceration. And they're wonderful people, beautiful, creative, smart, intelligent, driving forces that are changing the world and their communities. And so I'm really privileged to walk alongside them and really excited to talk about this issue because it's a big issue. So I'm going to frame up the problem a little bit and why we think this matters for you guys. And then we'll go ahead and meet the panel. So a couple important stats for you to know if you're not aware of this. I think some of these stats are really overwhelmingly alarming. If you didn't know, 1 in 3 Americans have a history of being arrested or having involvement with the justice system. That is more Americans than have a college degree today. So if that tells you anything, it tells you this is a big, big problem that we need to address. In addition to that, 600,000 people a year released from federal and state prisons into societies and into communities. That's a lot of people. And another 9 million cycle through local jail systems in response to arrests, misdemeanors, things like that. More than 2/3 of justice-involved people are rearrested within 3 years of being released because of lack of access to opportunity predominantly, and half of those are often reincarcerated. For people that have experienced interaction with the incarceration system and the justice system, more than 60% of them are unemployed within 1 year of release, and they typically take home about 40% less than their non-marginalized counterparts. Those lack of opportunity stats represent more than $370 billion of estimated lost GDP connected with our mass incarceration system and all of the consequences of mass incarceration in this country. So big problem that needs big innovative solutions. Here at Pallet, we believe in a reintegration ecosystem that supports both people and communities in helping people to come home and remain home. So in order to stop these cycles of recidivism, we need to cut off the justice system's supply of customers. We need to stop people from returning to the system. And in order to do that, we need to provide a variety of resources and support as they exit that system, everything from housing to workforce opportunities, community development, which is breaking down stigmas and allowing people to return home and places that they, need to be, even if it's not their home. They need access to social services, basic rights like food, water, and hygiene. And then we need to provide funding for these things and create effective policy that helps people get back on their feet and back on the right track. So with these situations in mind and all of this background that I've just laid the groundwork for, we're going to meet some awesome panel members that are doing great work and hear about the strategies that they're utilizing to help people reintegrate. So really excited to introduce you to these folks today. I quickly am going to tell you who they are, and then they're going to tell you more about what they're doing. So I'm really excited to welcome Jenna Reimer, who's the Director of Inclusive Hiring for CEO, the Center for Employment Opportunities. Paul, the Chief Operating Officer from the Kintalk Group, and I'll tell you more about what he's doing in a second. Jesse, who is a CAD designer at Pallet with us and has lived experience, and Tony McWright, who works for National League of Cities. I wanted to quickly share from Paul's side of things. We're really excited. Pallet's really privileged to be partnering with Paul and his group to provide a Pallet community for people that are exiting the system, that have wraparound support and services as they exit that system, and they have access to shelter through this site as well. So Paul's going to tell you more about that, but I wanted you to see pictures of the site and kind of some opportunities that we've been able to help create in partnership with Paul. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to each of the panel members to tell you more about themselves. We'll start with you, Paul, since we just talked about your site. Can you tell us a little more about yourself and the organization you work for and how you're working to reduce recidivism and reimagine justice through your work?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. As Amy mentioned, my name is Paul Tegenis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Kintalk Group. Kintalk is a nonprofit organization that providing reentry services in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We contract with various agencies in both states to provide residential, day reporting, and post-release services to formerly incarcerated individuals. And in an effort to reduce recidivism and really try to help transform their lives and help them stay home once they are home, Kintalk offers employment services, placement services, licensed behavioral health, substance abuse, health and wellness, life skills, and of course, what we're talking about today, housing assistance. And as Amy mentioned, one of the more recent projects that we've gotten into is our Village of Hope program, where we're utilizing the tiny homes and through Pallet to provide housing to individuals exiting the system who are still currently on parole. So that's how we wrapped into this, as housing is a major issue for those exiting the system, and clearly something that needs to be focused on in order to help those individuals stay home once they are released.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Tony, you want to tell us a little bit about your organization and what you're doing to reduce recidivism?
Sure, and thank you. Thank you, Pallet, for partnering with NLC. My name, of course, is Tony McWright. I am the program manager here at NLC on the Justice Initiatives team. And overall, with my colleague Annie, who kicked us off today, NLC, in a general sense, advocates for all 19,000 cities and towns across the country in a broad array of subject matter. Specifically here on the Justice Initiatives team, we work with cities who are looking to reimagine public safety or community safety, however it's framed in your area. And specifically, I assist with technical assistance, which is just helping cities implement some of the programs around public safety or community safety that they want to help improve in their cities. And we also have peer learning networks, and one that I lead is the Municipalities Reimagining Municipal Reentry Leaders Network. Sorry for all the acronyms. I'm thinking about the acronyms in my head. Municipal Reentry Leaders Network, which just celebrated our first year in existence in April during Second Chance Month. And we bring together city-level reentry directors, higher ed in the reentry space, as well as community-based organizations to discuss improve the transition from incarceration back home to our people at the local level.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. Jenna, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and how you're helping to reimagine justice through your work?
Absolutely. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Genevieve Reimer. I'm the Director of Inclusive Hiring at the Center for Employment Opportunities. At CEO, we have one mission and one vision, and that is to provide employment, paid immediate employment to people that are exiting the criminal legal system. We are in 30 cities in 12 states, and we operate transitional work crews. So our goal is to provide people the skills that they need to be competitive in the job market while providing them a daily wage so they can access things like shelter and housing and pay for themselves and their families as they navigate through their journey post-release. A little bit about me, I'm a social worker by trade, and my expertise comes from not only the almost 20 years that I've spent serving people post-incarceration, but also from my personal experience when I came back from incarceration in the mid-2000s. I love the work that we do because while I get to work with organizations like Pallet, I'm also keenly aware of how employment has been transformational in my life. So I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenna. And last but not least, Jesse, you want to introduce yourself and talk about your work both with Pallet and through your volunteer work as well, and how you're working to reduce recidivism.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Osalde. I am a CAD designer for Pallet shelters, building out the new prototypes and stuff like that. I'm formerly incarcerated, and Pallet has given me the platform to work with at-risk youth by showing them that there is a different way outside of prison. When you come out, you know, that you could start a meaningful life. I've used that platform to work with all kinds of at-risk youth and in the juvenile justice system.
Amazing. Thank you, Jesse. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to just go for it. I'm going to ask you all some questions and super excited to have this conversation today. So Jenna, I want to start with you. You mentioned briefly the importance of employment in your own journey, but also how you've seen it play out for other people. Can you speak to that a little bit? Tell us the benefit of CEO's model and how you see people progress from your program to permanent employment opportunities and how that's helped them.
Sure. You know, CEO has been around since the 1990s. And initially, and still, we are really good at providing people, like I mentioned, the skills that they need to find employment. But over the past couple of years, we've doubled down on advanced training programs, specifically around IT training, commercial driver's license, and other professional development opportunities. We realized that it's good for someone to get their first job, but most importantly, we need to position people for career and economic mobility more longitudinally. And I feel like that has been just so instrumental for my own journey, and I think in the journey of others, is providing people the skills that they need to be able to achieve success, which includes becoming a homeowner, which includes being able to have some money in your bank account for a rainy day, you know. And I feel like that is how employment is connected to housing and other measures that help people become secure. I started thinking just a second ago about what makes a house a home. And I started jotting down these characteristics. It's safety, it's community, it's sense of belonging, and it's love. And all of those things are so opposite from what someone experiences while they're incarcerated. And I feel like that's our natural drive and desire as human beings, is to find these connective issues, if you will, within our community and within our family and within ourselves. And so I feel like that's the bigger picture. Housing provides that in addition to employment, and they kind of work together to help people become far from who they used to be when they were incarcerated.
That's beautiful. Totally agree, Jenna. Thank you for that wonderful insight. While we're talking about employment, Jesse, I'd love to jump to you and have you share a little bit about your experience with upskilling while you were incarcerated, and then tell us how that exposure to opportunities within the prison system helped you get a job on your way out.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So when I first went to prison, there was no opportunity for education, and most of my prison sentence was done in Washington State. They had a couple math classes, and that's about it. I ended up going to a lower level institution at one point by doing good. I ended up getting into class. There was a CAD class. Didn't know what CAD was at that time or anything like that. but I got exposed to that, fell in love with it, continued doing it, finished the class out in like 2 years, started working in the prison doing CAD work. And that was something that I looked at and I was like, okay, I could see myself doing this long term. Upon getting released, I got a chance to apply at different places for CAD positions. And unfortunately, because of my felony past, I was getting shot down left and right. I met a guy through some charity work that I was doing that happened to know Amy, and he put me in contact with her. I got a over the phone online interview with Amy, and she said she would pass that along to her dad at the time, which was the director of engineering here. I sent him the resume, which all I had was schoolwork and nothing really in actual experience. He gave me a chance, and here I am almost 2 years later, still doing this and loving it, going back to school for an engineering degree. Pallet gave me the opportunity to actually, like Genevieve was saying, purchase a home, which I did recently, got married, got all of that. So yeah, it was upskilling is really hard to do in prison when you have a bunch of people trying to pull you in the negative way and you're trying to change your life and do something right.
Amazing. Thank you, Jesse. And it's been such a privilege and honor to have you here and watch you grow and achieve these things that you wanted to do, buying a home and all of that. Such an honor. All right, Tony, let's jump to you real quick since we're talking sort of about this lived experience and employment opportunity. Can you tell us about, I'm going to kind of lump two of your questions together here. Like, tell us about how you have identified and pursued professional and personal skills that you needed to excel in your career goals, and then how that played into your role in NLC, and that role has allowed you to reach back into your community. Let's talk about that a little bit.
All right. Thanks. That's a lot. I'm good. That's it.
Sorry.
And congrats, Jesse. That's an amazing story. Congrats again. Well, just a very quick background. So I spent 2 years in the federal system at a medium low in the camp. And when I was released, along the employment lines, even though I had a college degree, I was like, I'm going to be working at the McDonald's across the street from my house, right? Because there was no really reentry plan. They say there is one, but there really isn't, right? And so you're left to your own devices to figure out what you're going to do when you come home. And so for me, to your question about skills, I was lucky enough while incarcerated, before I went to the federal system, to be part of a pilot program by Georgetown called the Prison and Justice Initiative. And so when I came home, I was, again, lucky enough to be in the Washington, D.C. area, where there's some great programming for people coming home. And I was able to get into a reentry program that allowed me to be taught by Georgetown professors. And to your point at the beginning, Amy, about your sister organization, we had the wraparound experience. I had, like I said, teaching. We had transportation vouchers. We had internships after the first semester of academics, support from the business community. And so it was really important to have that support to be able to then focus on obtaining the skills, because you can't focus on obtaining skills if you don't know where you're going to lay your head at night. And so that was the biggest part of my transition home. And then to be able to continue to be involved with that Georgetown Pivot program, as well as here at NLC, where they give us plenty of opportunities at professional development. But I've also reached out to leadership organizations such as Just Leadership USA, where, I think you're nodding heads, so you're familiar with Just Leadership USA, where it's a training program for leaders who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. And so I'm just continuing to not say, oh, I made it out, but continuing to build up professionally and look at more opportunities. And I just want to add that I also have a hobby like Jesse does. I renovate houses in low-income neighborhoods and provide and make sure that they're affordable for the people who live there, because housing is so important to me. I realized when I even came home from prison, people in my neighborhood from been living there 20, 30 years and didn't own. And I said, well, you know, if they're not owning, I know people coming home don't have that opportunity either. So my goal is to make sure that we provide affordable housing and have a place that, a pathway for people coming home from incarceration to own a home eventually.
Amazing.
I know that was a lot. I don't even know if I answered your question directly, but I went all around.
You did. No, you did, Tony. That was great. And I appreciate the way that you brought up collaboration with stakeholders in your community. I think that's a really important part of a successful reintegration. For one individual needs help from the business community, the elected officials, the housing supporters. I mean, it's not a one and done kind of thing. It requires the whole community. It takes a village, like we say, Pallet, it takes a village to help someone really reintegrate. And interestingly enough, I'll quickly say from a language perspective, we often talk about folks that are exiting the justice system that they're reentering, which that's the standard language we use. But if you think about it in terms of when you enter a room, if no one's talking to you or you're not, you know, integrated with the people in the room, you're just there. And what's the point of that, right? And reintegration is really something that we're passionate about in the sense that you want to walk into a room or into a community or a societal group and say, I'm here, and have those people welcome you, right? And that looks like a job offering. It looks like access to housing. It looks like a lot of things. So I think that's wonderful. All the things that you mentioned are really important parts of this process for people. So you mentioned housing. That's a great segue. I'm going to transition over to Paul, and I would love to kind of talk about, you know, access to housing. We talk about affordable housing, the importance of that. We obviously need a lot more of affordable housing, but we also need housing that's accessible to people. And a lot of affordable housing is not accessible to people with criminal histories or, you know, a history of interaction with the justice system. So, Paul, can you sort of talk about your interim housing model, how it's working and how it's helping some of the folks that are coming to get services from you get back and integrated into their home communities?
Absolutely. And I think our program has started to take off now because of kind of the unique nature of what we try to do. Going back to the start of this, though, I think primarily, you know, when you look at housing and what we wanted to provide a safe and stable environment. Housing is a huge issue for individuals returning home, right? So all of the other challenges that these individuals face, if you put yourself in their position, right? We all go through our daily lives and we all have challenges, work, family, finances, all these things. But if you then imagine at the end of the day, not having, you know, a pillow to put your head down on, not having a place to return home and kind of just sit and be yourself and kind of decompress, it gives a sense of how much more challenging all of those other issues can be. And we're not just talking about people, you know, exiting the system who are homeless entirely, but even underhoused, you know, going from couch to couch, family member's house to family member's house. It's just not a recipe that's going to lead to success, or at least not without its barriers. And I think one of the things when we put the Village of Hope together was that we wanted to provide that sense of stability, that sense of community, a place to call their own. And just as importantly, we wanted it to be almost consist of a roadmap of here's where you are today and here's where we want you to end 6 months from now, which would be in permanent housing, not just the temporary housing that we provide in the Village of Hope. And just to kind of give a quick sense of what we have, our Village of Hope program is small. It's a pilot program. It's 6 housing units, a bathroom unit, and 2 community areas, like a kitchenette with laundry and a living room space. We also have outdoor space with a barbecue and some picnic benches and things like that because we really wanted the individuals in this community to build that, right, to build that sense of community, to be there to support each other, to make sure they're all going through that same experience. So we wanted to make sure that they not only had the support structure from the Kintock group, but from each other, because I think a lot of times that's just as, if not more valuable than what we're providing. So when we put this together, it was really looking ahead to say, okay, on day one, we want to provide this stable sense of housing. Now we want to focus on employment and we want to focus on budgeting. And then ultimately what we were able to do was in a partnership with this, and I'll get into that later, you know, in some of our other questions in terms of how important partnerships are in these types of projects, we were able to find funding that will support rental assistance down the line. So once these individuals are set up in the Village of Hope and are working and have steady income coming in, we're able to provide 3 months rent, a security deposit. We're able to really help get them on their feet. And that was what, when we built this project, what we wanted to say was, it's not just about helping you today, it's about helping you down the line 3-6 months from now, because that's really how you're going to impact recidivism, is looking ahead and really planning for tomorrow, not losing sight of that.
Yeah, that's great. Super helpful, Paul. Thank you. And I appreciate that you mentioned, and I think it's a really important point, that models like what you're doing are really meant to be temporary interim opportunities to stabilize people, get them connected to services, and then move them on to equitable, accessible, affordable, permanent options, because we want people to get back into life and back on a different trajectory. We don't want to trap them in these interim models, right? So thank you for mentioning that. I think that's super important. I'm going to stick with you for a second and ask you another question. In light of what you're offering your clients right now and the people that are coming to you for services, what difference do you see the stabilization of shelter making in their lives and their opportunities to then move on to the next thing?
I think some of it is just as simple as, hey, I have an address. Like, I have an address that I can get mail at. I have an address that I can put on a job application. I think having the ability to come home at night and make a call if there's something that you need. I mean, we offer a transitional service specialist at the program who is there to provide anything that, we're not thinking of. Since we're in a pilot program and we're about 5 months in, we learn from our clients. So, what we have found is that just that sense of stability, having that place to call home at the end of the day and uses that kind of the base to jump off at into dealing with the employment challenges and the health and wellness challenges and all of these other things, it gives that it gives them the ability to really slow things down. And I think at times, as I mentioned earlier, we run residential facilities, and a lot of that is people in the tail end of a sentence or the beginning stages of their parole. But when they leave all of that structure behind. And if someone's been in the system for 3, 4, 5, however many years, they're used to that structure. And sometimes just coming home and hitting the ground running, it's important to slow things down. And I think being able to provide an environment where we can say, look, you can go off, you can do your thing. Yeah, you have a parole officer, and yes, we're here to help you. But at this point, this is you. Like, this everything is your choice now. You have the choice to go to work. You have the choice to come back to to your home at night. I think it just provides that sense of another step in the right direction, because there are a lot of challenges that the individuals are facing, and how do you focus on employment or sobriety or mental health issues or just filling your medications on your own and getting to the pharmacy and dealing with health insurance and all that other stuff. I mean, having the base of the program with the wraparound services that we do, I think has really been a big help. And it's why I think parole in the state of New Jersey, the parole board actually came on and said, yeah, we'll support this. And as part of the pilot, we're focusing on individuals who are just on parole to provide housing, because it's been such an issue.
Yeah. That's so important and great answer, Paul. I think it's interesting. I've heard stories too of individuals who've been incarcerated for extended periods of time, done long sentences, and they come out, and something as simple as going to the drugstore to buy a toothbrush can be life-altering kind of experience, because, when you've been incarcerated for 20, 30, 40 years and you just get a issued toothbrush every week or month or whatever, and then you have to go and choose them and there's 50 options. Like you mentioned, that loss of structure can create sort of a feeling of chaos. Like, I don't even know what to do with this now because I haven't had to do this for a while. And it's so shocking for someone like me who hasn't had that experience, but it's such an important thing to remember that there's a lot going on for these folks that they have to navigate. So online of what Paul was talking about, Jenna, I want to jump back to you and sort of talk about the employment experience and the things that the resources that your clients need in addition to what you're offering them, which is jobs. And I know you guys have a lot of partnerships and things that you leverage to get people what they need. But can you talk about some of the other things that some of your folks tend to need to be able to move on to their next step and be successful in their reintegration?
Absolutely. I was jotting down a ton of notes as Paul was talking and as you were talking, so I'm ready to go, Amy, for this one.
Awesome. I love it.
I feel like what we were just chatting about was how people can be shocked after coming back from incarceration, and then it's almost like a shell shock, and they're put back into the community, and there's an expectation that they're supposed to know how to maneuver through all of these, stores and people and this whole different society that they are now being exposed to. But I also wanted to talk about the transferable skills that people learn while they're incarcerated. And yes, they may be a bit shocked to be, re-immersed into society, but they're also strong and resilient and resourceful. And through their prison experience or incarceration experience, learn tons of skills that any employer would be lucky to have. When Jesse was chatting earlier, Amy, I wrote down, I said, although Jesse only had school work on his resume, he had a whole lot of heart. And I'm sure that when you chatted with him, Amy, that came across. And I even wrote this down. Amy was the lucky one. Amy was the lucky one that you came across her path. And I think it's so imperative that we start thinking about people coming back from incarceration with that mindset, that we're lucky to have them as part of our workforce, that we're lucky to have them as employees, as colleagues, as partners in this work, because they're so skilled and they're so talented. I think, though, if we have to, there's partnerships that are critical to help people get off the ground. Or to kind of, hit the ground running, if you will. A couple of months ago, I partnered with LinkedIn Learning, and I created the first of its kind content specifically for job seekers with past convictions. And it's called Job Seeking with a Criminal Record. And I spent a large portion of that course helping people build their confidence. It's hard for anyone to go into an interview and to be confident and to talk about the skills that you bring to an organization, but it's extremely difficult for people that are battling the external stigma and internal shame to talk about themselves in a compelling way. And I feel like that is where we have to start at. We have to build people up and encourage them to think about themselves through a constructive way, through a strengths-based way, and then begin to build out their partnerships and networks. There's that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and that also rings true to people that are coming back from incarceration. So we can play a key part in people's life by connecting them with our networks. They may not trust, the employers may not trust the people initially, but they trust you. And so as they begin to trust you, they're going to trust the people that you send over to them. And us being those credible messengers is so instrumental in helping people progress on their reentry journey.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Amazing. So important. And I love what you said. So touching. And I think it's helpful for people who haven't had that experience. I mean, we have a number of people here on this panel who have personal lived experience with the justice system and all that comes from facing the barriers as you exit. But for lots of people who don't have that experience, it's really hard to understand, and that stigma is so strong. So it helps for us to be doing things like this so people can hear from you and learn from you and better understand what those challenges are. So on that line, I want to jump to Jesse and Tony. And Jesse, I'll have you go first. I'd love for you to share with everyone who's listening two things. One, what were some things, some resources or tools that you had access to that were helpful to you as you exited? And then what are some things that you didn't have, or one thing that you didn't have that you wish you had that you could say should be provided today for others?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. For resources, honestly, I had none. DOC at that time was not providing resources for reentry or anything like that. They were talking about that they had a statewide reentry council, but none of us in prison knew that. So I ended up working with some churches, and it was a group called One Parish, One Prisoner that basically takes one inmate and a whole congregation adopts that inmate and helps them build a reentry. Honestly, if it wasn't for my aunt, who she was the one solid person I had there the entire time I did, and I did 22 years, so it was pretty tough. I think one of the things that is lacking in prisons is computer skills. Like I didn't know how to use a cell phone.
Yep.
I didn't know how to go to the bank. None of that. It was pretty tough. But I think those kind of skills and soft skills, which I did not have any. I didn't know how to talk to people.
Yeah.
Basically, I would just bark orders or say what I wanted right then and there, and I figured out real quick that's not the way it works out here. So I think those things were the things lacking. More resources for people coming out of prisons, or better access to resources.
Yeah.
I think maybe some of the nonprofits should all kind of like join together to form some just giant nonprofit.
Yeah. There's a lot of lack of collaboration and siloing of organizations that work in reentry, right? And I think there's a desire to collaborate, but a lack of access to each other. So we can talk about that more in a minute, but great answer, Jesse. Thank you. Tony, you want to answer the question, what things did you have access to, if you did, to help you with your reintegration process? And then what things did you not have that you wish you had?
Well, I touched a little bit on being lucky enough to have the resources once I got out with the reentry program. Like Jesse, there wasn't much inside behind the wall at the federal level. They have all this programming on paper, doesn't really translate to in reality. But I do want to, touch on going back to the housing with Paul, and this still answers your question. Stay on track here. But I mentioned the reentry network and talking about what's needed. So when we kicked off last year, we had a poll, and I asked the city leaders, these are city reentry directors from across the country, what is your number one issue affecting, what's your number one challenge for people coming home from incarceration? And overwhelming, it was providing housing. Before jobs, before workforce development, before mental health services, the number one issue facing our cities when it comes to transitioning home is housing. And so that changed the direction or set the course for our reentry network and how we went about what we talked about. And you just talked about collaboration, Amy. And so we talk about that every day. And so with a lot of the money coming for ARPA and the Infrastructure Acts, we're working with cities helping them identify areas where they can help people coming home, working and collaborating with the nonprofits in the area and the higher ed in the realm who have already flattened the learning curve. You just heard Paul talk about, his housing. You've heard Genevieve and Jesse talk about. So these are the experts. So we're collaborating. We're pushing collaboration by saying, hey, the cities to partner with the CBOs, community-based organizations and higher ed in this space to increase efficiency and flatten the learning curve, because they're already doing this great work. The cities sometimes have the money and really don't have the plan, and so we're really pushing this collaborative effort, and then including people with lived experience in the solutions, I believe is paramount, is very imperative, because people closest to the problem sometimes are closest to the solution. And so we hang our hat on that, and so including people as we talk about these solutions is another thing that can, and I see people in the Q&A kind of asking what can be done, and so I think that's very important moving forward.
Yeah, that's great, Tony. I love that, and I completely agree. And I would say, you said people that are closest to the problem are sometimes closer to the solution, and I would say, in my experience, people that are closest to the problem are always closest to the solution, not sometimes. I have never ever been with a person with lived experience who didn't know how to solve the problem. People who have walked that journey know exactly what to do to fix the journey for the person coming behind them. And most of them want to help the person coming behind them. And there's a beautiful employment model there as well. But I won't get on my soapbox about that. So that was a great segue, Tony. I would love to jump to a question that I'm going to ask all of you. Before I do that, I just want to remind all of our webinar attendees, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. We can see them, and we're going to pick up and answer some of those in just a few minutes. There's some really good ones in there already, so I'm super excited to jump to Q&A. But before we do that, I want to end with one kind of blanket question for all the panelists, which Tony kind of just touched on, which is, from your position of experience working with people with people exiting and/or your own experience with exiting the system, what would you tell legislators, city officials, policymakers? What can they do in their cities and home communities to help people that are exiting the system? And what should they be thinking about in terms of, changing policy, looking at opportunities for people? What would you encourage them to do? Very tactical things. So, Paul, you want to start?
Sorry, I was answering a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Bad timing. Yeah.
I think most importantly is the partnerships, and I mentioned this earlier. When we first had started talking locally, and our program is located in the city of Bridgeport, so we were talking to the mayor and to Gateway, which is the organization that really brought the idea to us. We started talking about, okay, well, how do we let people know what we're going to do? We can't just one day have 6 tiny homes and a couple other buildings sitting on a lot. So you really need the ability to have buy-in and to have the collaboration and the partnerships to be able to reach the people you need to reach in order to make it work. And that's everything from the zoning side of things and all of the legalities of opening a place like this, as in addition to the buy-in, the NIMBY stigma, the not in my backyard. I mean, not everyone is open to wanting to give their neighborhood or their area to reentry. So I think that if we, if you're looking at an area and you want to build this, then we have to have people understand most people in jail, in prison, are coming home. So they can either come home with the services or they won't. And they're much more likely to succeed and stay home if we have those services. So I think, communication a lot of times is like the easy answer, right? Oh, better communication will solve everything, but it really does. Leading up to this, at the opening of this project, we were on weekly meetings and we were inviting in first responders and people from the county and the city to really open up and say to everybody, here's our idea. Here's what we want it to look like. What concerns do you have? Let us address that right now. And I think from that side, from the policymaker and the legislator side, it's really being open to that the initial possible either criticism or the rolling of eyes because it's so far outside of the box, but then getting to that point of, no, this can really work. Come in, visit it. Let us show you what we really can do with this project. And I think that's where we have gotten is we've received that support, and now all of a sudden we're getting calls from other parts of the state saying, tell me more. What does this look like? How is it beneficial? What is the cost? And I think the final piece of that is also not stopping too short, right? When we're talking about policy, it's not just about getting a tiny home today to put someone that's homeless into a home. It's getting those wraparound services and really looking ahead and saying, okay, well, if we're going to help this person today, how can we help them in 6 months? How do we do renter's assistance or housing assistance? What's the next step? And I think it's really looking big picture, and it's not just looking at one isolated area. It's looking at everything and trying to collaborate. And I don't know if I went too far off in a different direction, but that's where it's a policy as much as just that idea of being open and bringing everyone to the table as quickly as possible if you want to do something like this.
Yeah, love that. Totally agree, Paul. Jenna, you want to answer the question? What would you tell, cities, policymakers, legislators, and what they should do to help this population?
Sure, and I'm going to make this as quick as possible. So I have 2 responses. So the first one is I'll never forget the time I was moderating a panel, and I thought I had my questions, perfected, and I turned to the gentleman sitting next to me, and I told him, can you tell us about what it was like when you were coming home from incarceration? And he looked at me in front of all of the audience members, and he said, ma'am, by you saying home, you're insinuating that I had a home to come home to. And I'll never forget that moment, and I talk about it as much as I possibly can, even though it makes me very vulnerable. And I raise my hand from that moment on and say, I need to learn, I need to do better. I need to recognize that not everyone coming back from incarceration has a home. And much of that is because of the collateral consequences, outdated collateral consequences in the forms of policy that you have the power to change, that city officials have the power to change by looking through old policies that are keeping people away from their houses and from their homes. Secondly, I'm from Los Angeles County. In Los Angeles County right now, they're doing a whole fair chance hiring campaign that includes 4 major components. The first is shifting narratives. So they're telling stories about people to change the hearts and the minds of employers or other people that serve this particular population. They're supporting employers with helping them change practices and policies. First is hearts and minds. Second is practices and policies. Third is they're collecting data. Data is going to help drive change forward. And fourth, they're connecting job seekers to jobs. Those 4 things that the city or this county has taken on has been so instrumental in helping to shift employment practices so more people with past convictions can find employment. And I feel like that model is transferable to other important issues like homelessness as well and houselessness.
Amazing. I love that. Those are really great points. And I think it's so true. There's an interesting connection between employment opportunity, which then leads to access to housing and sustainability of housing access. I mean, all of these things are we need them all, right? So just putting someone in a house does not solve the problem, right? And it's a common misperception and a popular American narrative under Housing First, which I agree with, by the way, but a popular narrative to say, put someone in a house and they're no longer homeless or their problem is solved. That's not true. 4 walls and a roof do not solve a person's problems getting reintegrated. They need a job, they need connection to community, all those things. And we have to address them all in order for people to be successful, whether they're reintegrating from the justice system or homelessness. So we have some awesome questions in the chat box here that I want to run through, and we're running out of time already. I knew this was going to happen because everybody on here is so excited and passionate about this issue. But one of the questions that came up that I thought was really interesting and I wanted to kind of pitch to Jesse, he answered it online, is somebody asked, have you ever been through a halfway house? What was that experience like? Do you think transitioning through a Pallet village would have been more beneficial to you and to others who you know who may be struggling with transition? So Jesse, you answered this live, but do you want to add any color or context to this idea? Well, you're muted.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries.
So I did answer that one. I said that I did go through the halfway house 6 months prior to release. Transitioning through a Pallet village would have been nice. At a halfway house, you have a certain amount of time to transition. You go and they try to put it in steps for you. It doesn't matter how much time you did. The steps are the same. And so transitioning from incarceration to finally being out on the streets is different for everybody. I think in a Pallet village, it would have been able to slow down the pace of my transitioning and would have helped a little bit, a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's great, Jesse. And the other thing I've noticed too is halfway houses that we have here in Washington, oftentimes they don't have a good regulatory process around monitoring to make sure they're doing what they say they're doing. So there's a lot of clean and sober housing that's not clean and sober at all. So people will go there and then experience substance use. And so the idea of people having their own space that they can lock a door and sort of have that quiet space, Paul mentioned this before, where they can sort of recenter themselves and engage with what they need to engage with, but have the dignity of their own space in a community setting. I think there's something really valuable to that too. Paul, do you want to add any additional thoughts or color to this question as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we run residential centers, halfway houses, and I think this is just the gradual next step. I think it's one of those things that not everyone needs, but those that do need it, I think it's just that gradual progression. Like Jesse was saying, it's almost like this, you don't want a cookie cutter. And I said that in one of my answers in the chat earlier, but everyone needs different things. Everyone moves at different paces. So I think the more we can provide as step down services, the better. And, you know, it won't be for everybody, but it may be for a few. And if you help a few, then it was worth it in the long run. So,
yeah. Tony just live answered this question too. And I love your answer, Tony. You want to unmute and tell us what you had to say about this?
About the halfway house?
Yeah. Were you willing to share that? out loud?
Oh, yeah. I know there's a couple of DC folks in the audience, too. I see them in the Q&A. Well, I was at Hope Village in the District of Columbia, which was one of the most notorious halfway houses in the nation. It's been closed, but two things. One was it was closed without implementing a backup plan or a new plan, so now people are not housed close to, when they come home for halfway house, are not housed close. They're in Baltimore, Philadelphia, so it took one problem and exacerbated it. So something like a Pallet Village would have been like, it would have been a change maker, right? You know, it's just so many things that was wrong with the current halfway house situation. We don't have enough time for that, but there was nothing close to anything that prepared you for coming home, anything that gave you that real transition with housing or anything. So, yeah, I think when we look at halfway houses, we have to look at what's in existence and what can be done, and have a plan that can go into effect once it closes, because it just went from bad to worse.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and that's kind of leads me to the next question, which I think is an interesting one. And quickly, I'll pause and let everyone who's entering questions know we are going to download all of these questions and do written responses to all of them that we will email out to you. So don't worry if we don't get to your question, because there's no way we're going to get to all of these. So many good questions. We will provide answers on these to all of you to review, because we have your contact information. But what Tony just mentioned in transition, I think that's a really interesting point. Whether it's a pallet shelter, a halfway house, whatever, I think there's interim solutions, whether it be housing or even employment opportunities, like what CEO does. You know, they'll help people get engaged with employment, but then the goal is to get them permanently placed with an employment opportunity. And so all of these things are transitional in nature. Let's maybe talk a little bit about what that looks like in reality in terms of, you know, the partnerships that Paul mentioned. How do we build that opportunity and find the partners and communities so that we don't have people stuck in interim solutions forever? So whether it be, you know, figuring out how to get past background checks for employment opportunities or background checks for rental opportunities. Can you speak to where you've seen some things across the country that work in this regard, or what you think should be done in this regard? And I'll open it up. Whoever wants to go first, go for it.
I think something unique that we do at CEO is, while we love our participants, we don't want them to stay. We, you know, our goal is to get them equipped with the skills that they need and then to send them on their way to full-time employment in a place of their choosing. But I also think it's important to call out that it's not always successful on their first try or their second try. And so we have an open door policy. So after someone is placed with an employer and for whatever reason they experience job loss, they're immediately welcomed back into our program. And that day, as soon as they come back on the crew, we begin to pay them their daily wage, which we know can be life stabilizing. The second thing is as part of the inclusive hiring department at CEO, I am working. My whole job is dedicated to partnering with stakeholders, employers, and government officials to help change policies and practices by sharing my story and by equipping people with tools that they need to successfully implement changes within employment policies and practices. So we're doing the work and we're doing it with employers that are really interested and employers that are not, but just need to hire skilled and talented people. But we need people to partner in this work. And so if you're interested, please feel free to shoot me an email. I would love to chat with you and see how we can collaborate further.
Awesome. Anyone else you want to comment on, you know, how we help people transition from interim solutions to permanent solutions that keep them on the right path? No? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think a lot of it is, and this goes with what Genevieve was saying, it's those clear expectations. It's that you're not going, you know, if there's a roadblock right now, it doesn't mean it's the end of the journey, right? Yeah. And I think that another piece that, you know, we've talked about the halfway houses a few times during this, but I think there's this whole other segment, particularly for reentry, that doesn't get brought up enough, which is the max outs. And there's this whole population that when they're released from prison or jail, they don't have even the support of a parole officer or of a parole unit to provide anything. So there are programs out there now, I can speak to for New Jersey and Pennsylvania, that are just pure post-release voluntary services. Do you need this? Come see us. And it doesn't have to be you were released yesterday. It can be a year from now. You left with a job, you left with housing, you left the Village of Hope completely stable. And in 6 months, you know what, you lost your job, you need help, come see us, we can provide that. So I think that's another kind of piece in this puzzle, is looking at that part after they're done with the system, after they're off all of the paper, that these support services are still there.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, Paul. Tony, did you want to answer?
No, I love that too, Paul. I just want to add that that's an outstanding point. I still, 3 years later, reach back out to my reentry program. Like, they're still in contact with me. I still work with them, volunteer, or they reach out and see if we need anything. They have an alumni network that sends out emails about jobs. So it's not just a one and done. It's follow through, follow up, and then, because lowering recidivism isn't just, like you said, 3-6 months. It's, further down the line. So yeah, that continuous follow up from your reentry program I think is paramount.
Yeah, that's so great. I love that. And I think what you're talking about, if we can drill it down to the core, what people need, it's connection to community, right? And like what you just said, Tony, makes me think about, you created a community with the group that you were reentering with, whether it be the service providers or the other people that you were engaged in that process at the same time as you. That shared lived experience bonds you together in a way that human experience that we all need, right? And I think that connection to community is so critical, and that community can be tactical in nature. It can help you get a job. It can help you get housing. It can also just be a community that you embed yourself in and find a place of belonging and shared experience that you then can fall back to and work with and lean on when things happen in life, because things happen in life and they'll keep happening, right, for all of us. And so I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. I will add that on Pallet's side of things, I think one of the really important things we've seen is cities who make really comprehensive plans that address who are the stakeholders in their community. We have a service we provide called Path Forward that helps cities reimagine addressing homelessness and issues like this. And in doing so, we're helping them do a needs assessment. Who are the stakeholders in your community? What are they doing? Do they need to be audited? Are they actually good players in this game, or are they perpetuating people's cycles of poverty and recidivism because those are their customers, right? These are important questions. And then how do we help people connect with jobs, with housing, with service provision, with whatever, public services, mental health and healthcare services? All of those things have to be in play, and it helps for cities to know who these people are. And oftentimes they're nonprofit organizations that are going out of business or non-sustainable. So keeping an updated directory of what's available and who people can access is a really important part of this process. On that note, there's a really interesting question in here that I love and I want us to answer. So this is from a gentleman named David, and he said, "Thanks for having this presentation. As a formerly homeless person, I'm very aware of the challenges and barriers homeless people face. My question is, this field is filled with people with little to no experience and little to no desire to get homeless people into permanent housing. The lack of sense of urgency is utterly absent, and I'm wondering what can be done to ensure people working with homeless people have a sense of urgency to get people into permanent housing." I love this question because I think David is right. I think, we work in homeless response as well and recidivism response, and there are a lot of bad players in the game who are looking for customers for their services, right? So let's all talk about our experience with some of this and how, from our place of power in a system working with people, how can we make sure that the work we're doing and the services we're providing are actually elevating people to where they never come back to us again. Jenna, you talked about it a little bit, but let's talk about that for a few minutes. Who wants to start? It's a good one.
I'm like going back and forth with not jumping in first because I jumped in first last time. So.
Okay. All right, Jenna, go for it.
I think David answered his own question. And that is having people that are closest to the problem develop these solutions. Mm-hmm. And that requires people that don't have that direct experience stepping back and trusting those that have lived it and that have lived it and have survived it begin to become the decision makers. I think that's super critical. It allows there to be a sense of urgency, and it allows there to be an extra layer of expertise that people that have never lived it simply don't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. Any final thoughts from anyone else on this issue? We're out of time and we have to wrap up, which I'm so sad about because I'm so enjoying this conversation. But any final thoughts from anyone?
If I could just plug real quick, if there are any city leaders on this call, Kiara put our invitation to our reentry network in the chat, I believe. So please join. And Genevieve just hit on something I also said. I just want to reiterate, including people who are closest to the problem in the solution. I want to say it over and over again. We're being excluded, and we see what that results in: terrible policies being enacted that don't consider the expertise that we have. So please, if you're a city leader out there, consider including people with lived experience as you develop solutions.
Yes, love that. I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to the panel members for providing your experience, both working with folks and your own personal lived experience. We're honored to know and hear your story. And we'll send out the recordings and all the answers to the questions to you all. Thanks again for joining, and have a good day.